Welcome to the Sports Trading Card Hall of Fame. Today I'm going to be talking about a story of cardboard of a person who is, well, very few people are familiar with him, even though he was a pretty significant part of the story of sports collectibles in the 1990s. Just not for those of us in cards, or not so much that for those of us in cards. And that is Chris Martin, who was a linebacker for the Kansas City Chiefs. He was a player who stood alongside Derek Thomas. He stood behind Neil Smith. He was part of a great defense, and he was a Pro Bowler. Not a pro. He wasn't like all pro. He wasn't at that level, but he was still at a very prominent level athletically, where his career was strong. But he also knew he needed to prepare for a career afterwards, and he joined a long list of athletes who have prepared for their future while during their playing days, which, I mean, Pinnacle actually made a whole subset in their first year in 91, as well as again in 1992, of careers and hobbies that athletes had. So you had a chance to see some of the different ideas that players had for extracurricular activities, career-wise or hobby-wise. Chris was not a part of that series, but that was partially because of timing. Chris wanted to do something that catered to a part of the collecting community that isn't usually focused on, which is young kids. And that's very much a 90s idea, because in the 1980s, kids were addressed. It was called sports cards. It's literally what they were. But there were also stickers, and that was a big part of it for kids. In fact, for a lot of us, Panini, it's weird to say Panini sports cards because Panini was stickers in the 1980s. And we looked down on it, or a lot of us looked down on it quite a bit. But kids were no longer really a part of the sports card community in the early 1990s. And it wasn't just because the hobby was evolving with the kids of the 80s and growing up with us. It's also because as you got into the 1990s, the world around kids was changing. Kids were changing. In the 1980s, computer games existed. There was Nintendo, there was Commodore 64, there was Atari home consoles. You had video games, but you had to buy a home console, get these bulky games. It was a pretty laborious process, and the games were very rudimentary. Computer games were basically, if you had Windows, you had an early version of Solitaire. Outside of that, not a lot for your computer either, if you had a computer. But as you got into the 1990s, computers became a lot more common. You had handheld Nintendo games now, and it was a world where video games were more a part of younger kids' experience, but you also had a broader digital world for kids, and things were a lot flashier than they'd been in the past, which meant that attention spans were lower, but also you needed to do something really special and unusual to grab a kid's attention. In the 1980s, it was analog. It was, if it's not in front of you, it doesn't exist. In the 1990s, it was a lot different because there was a lot more stuff around you. That's just the way that it was. And so that meant that in order to really capture a young audience, you had to think outside of the box and make something that woke them up and went, that's just cool, and I need to be a part of it. And when you do that, you can't expect that down the road that's going to be sustainable. You got to come up with something new pretty frequently, and that's really what happened with Chris Martin Enterprises. He decided to focus on making stuff for kids, collectibles that worked in a way that was unusual, that opened a new door. And so in 1992, he started off with his very first set, which was called dog tags. These were wearable cards. They are complete cards. They were actually designed more, instead of for those of us who never went to games, they were designed more for kids who did go to games. So every single one of the cards, on the back, it has a place for an autograph. And on the front, it has a picture of the player and all of the stuff that goes into it. It's designed to be worn around the neck. It's a wearable card. Because look, let's go back to stickers. The great thing about stickers is you can, stick them on anything. And so kids would just like in the 1950s and 1960s, where kids would stick a baseball card, a bubblegum card, into the spokes of their tire or their bicycle and ride around it with it clicking. And that what basically you could take a 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle, clip it onto your bike, and as you're riding around with that sound going on, you have a Mickey Mantle bicycle. Sounds dumb today, but at the time, that's what you wanted. You have a Ted Williams bicycle. You have an Ernie Banks bicycle. It's a weird concept, but when you're a kid, it makes sense. In that same spirit, Chris Martin and his team figured out, well, let's make wearable cards so that just like where you take stickers and you stick it on your backpack and you put it on your Trapper Keeper and your, whatever, we'll do the same thing where now you can wear it around. You can wear your favorite player, your favorite team. You can wear it around everywhere you go. And then when you go to a game, you can get the player to autograph the collectible that you wear with you that's a part of your identity. It was a cool idea that worked for a couple of years, and then it was time to move on. What they moved on to was Pro Mags. They're magnets that are of players. They're numbered too. There's a set. There's actually a set. There are inserts. It's weird, but that's what he did. He came up with a different idea of magnets, which is fun in its own right. And then they tried stamps. Stamps didn't last very long. And eventually, the Pro Mags would kind of wear their way down, and they would end up, the business would change. And so it wasn't a long-term business for him, or at least the collectibles side wasn't a long-term business for him, but it was an interesting experiment. And what's great about it is that it's a weird combination where he was one of only two athletes to try to get in, or two active athletes who tried to get into the sports card world. Even though he was sports card adjacent, he was trying to make a more kid-based idea for sports cards that has its own cool quality to it. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I never collected these, never cared to. I was too old and sophisticated. I was a teenager. Dude, yeah, I saw them in Kmart, and I wasn't going to touch those things because they were too juvenile for me. It wasn't until I started the Sports Card Professor project. As I'm working on it, I got a fascination for it because now I'm looking at it as an archaeologist going, oh, those are so cool. Not because I'm a kid going, they're so cool, but because I am now looking back at them going, well, that's unusual. And that's really kind of the spirit of it that makes it so great, is just how unusual, how distinct, how fascinating it is to look at them and go, what a cool idea. What a cool concept, how fresh, and such a distinct thing about the 1990s. Couldn't have happened before, couldn't have happened after. It was perfectly for that time. But that is combined with the fact that it came from an actual athlete, and an athlete who was pretty well respected and pretty well known too. So that actually added to it, which is, whereas, with Upper Deck, it started with an athlete that I don't know if he even played for 5 years. His career may have completely disappeared, in which case, good thing that he helped start Upper Deck. So the fact that we have an athlete who contributed to our own experience as card collectors, albeit for a much younger segment of the community, still, it's really fascinating, and it's something I really like. I'd love to continue on, but I don't really know what else really needs to be said, because I think that's about all that needs to be said. I will be doing, over on the Sports Card Professor channel, at some point I am going to be doing a whole deep dive, and so I'll probably be able to get more into it at that point. But I mean, what more is there to say at this point? And this is something that I definitely want to at least get out there and make sure that people are aware of what he did and how he contributed to our general experience. Yeah. So thank you very much for watching this story of cardboard, and watching all the way through to the end. If you haven't subscribed, please do so, and be sure to check the other stories of cardboard that I've told over the last couple of years, because there are some interesting stories that just don't get discussed hardly ever around sports cards that I've been able to cover here on this project, which is a lot of fun. So yeah, thank you very much for watching.